Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to revisit the McCartney album from 1970, which I haven't done for 9 years. I was looking on my channel, so it's about time. But before I do that, 3 updates. First of all, I'd like to pay tribute to Arnold Yarrow, who just passed away, the oldest surviving actor from Doctor Who. He memorably played Bilal, this character here, silver character, in Death to the Daleks, the John Pertwee, 1974, and he was the ripe old age of 104, which is remarkable. So rest in peace, Arnold. Joey Molland is out of danger, I'm happy to say. I don't think he's quite back at home yet, but he was in hospital in intensive care recently, and partly due to all the prayers that were made for him and thoughts and stuff, positive thoughts, he's made a recovery, or he's on the road to recovery, which is great news. And thirdly, 50th anniversary to my favourite Christmas song, Wombling Merry Christmas. The Wombles come from Wimbledon, where I come from in London. American viewers will not know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to leave a link to the wonderful video for the Wombling Merry Christmas song, which in my view is the best Christmas song ever. So with that introduction done, I'm going to go on to the McCartney album. So this came out in April 1970, and as we well know, it was right at the time when the Beatles were kind of splitting up, so it's often associated with that. Just want to say that I remember Richard McCook, my friend from Ireland, did he did a ranking of all the McCartney albums, and I don't want to give you a spoiler, but I will. He put this at the very top, and if you want to check out his video, it's very interesting. But I think it's a fine choice to pick this as top. I didn't do that myself, but I could have done, because it's an album which is unpretentious. It's not trying to have hit singles or anything. It's no adornments, really, no orchestration. Just Paul on his own with Linda helping out on vocals, and it's remarkable, and it's homegrown. And as I say, I come back to it quite often. It's aged, I think, a lot better than some of his other albums, certainly the more recent ones. Neil Young, when he was inaugurating Paul into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, sung the praises of this album. Said it almost inspired him to go solo, although it was a bit of a strange comment because he'd already done a couple of solo albums, albeit one with Crazy Horse, but it encouraged him to leave Crosby, Stills and Nash, who he was with at the time, and strike up a solo career again. I don't know, but anyway, that was a nice comment from Neil. At the time, it got disparaged by the critics, and Paul's fellow Beatles didn't think much of it. Lennon, in the Rolling Stone interview, said it was rubbish, and he said his Plastic Ono Band will scare him into do something decent, which is quite harsh. Harrison, interviewed at the time when the album came out, said he liked That Would Be Something and Maybe I'm Amazed, but the rest didn't do much for him. He said it was okay, but he didn't like it. Ringo was not keen either. Most of the press reviews were saying it's not Abbey Road. Well, of course it's not Abbey Road. It's not trying to be sort of a pop symphony or anything like that. And George Martin is notably absent, but he was just having fun at home, and it was a difficult time because I wouldn't say he'd fallen out with his mates, his 3 Beatle mates, but they were having a difficult time, particularly over business stuff. So he found it a bit fraught going into the office and discussing business with the Alan Klein situation. The other 3 wanted Alan Klein to be the manager, and he didn't. So he just said he had a better time with his family, so he just stayed at home, and eventually he would go into EMI and use Abbey Road's facilities for some of the album, and he'd also use the studios in North London called Morgan Studios, which no longer exist as studios, I don't think, but that's an interesting location because I think a lot of groups over the years have recorded there, including Supertramp, who did their first album. And they must have been close to coinciding time-wise, because Supertramp's first album came out in 1970 and Paul was there from February, sort of March period, so that must have been close. I think The Cure recorded a few things there, if memory serves me right. Anyway, George Martin described it in an interview as very much a homemade affair, and I don't think he thought much of it. He just thought it was a bit casual, and that's what Lennon said, light and loose. That's not a bad thing, and a lot of people were saying it compares badly to John's Plastic Ono Band and George Harrison's All Things Must Pass because it didn't have a message and it wasn't masterfully produced. Well, Lennon Plastic Ono Band is pretty bare bones production. Admittedly, it's got Klaus and Ringo helping him out, but it's certainly similar to McCartney in more respects now, looking back at it, than we were aware of at the time, or would have been aware of had I been old enough to appreciate it at the time. They're both kind of homespun affairs, or stripped back affairs, should I say, and without noticeably no strings, no George Martin on hand, which is quite refreshing actually. And not all Things Must Pass is spectrized, so to speak. Some of that is quite sort of pared down in terms of instrumentation, although on the whole not, I would say. But anyway. This is an honest album about, Paul said it was about home, family and love, and I think that's quite accurate. Although, as I say, it was tarnished at the time by the association with the Beatles split, and when the album came out, Paul included a self-interview where he answered various questions about the state of the Beatles and etc. And he maintains that the guys in the Apple office came up with the questions, but both Peter Brown and Derek Taylor said that Paul came up with all of the questions himself, and that one's still out for debate. But anyway, the interview was mainly known because he said the Beatles are having a temporary breakup, and he said temporary or permanent, I don't know. And it's due to personal musical and business differences. So the press leapt on that and said Beatles have split. But he also said in the same interview, I love John and respect what he does. It doesn't give me any pleasure, when he asked about John's peace campaign. So it wasn't all sort of nasty, but it did come across as nasty, and the press and the public actually, most of them blamed Paul for the split. And although they went out in their droves to buy the album and it reached near or the top of the charts in both the US and the UK, the critics had fun just slagging it off. Jan Wenner is famously known, I'm not sure if this is true, but it's a sort of story, that the original review was quite favourable, and Jan Wenner, the editor of Rolling Stone, said, could you make it a bit more unfavourable? Anyway, on the Jan Wenner subject, even if he's not guilty of doing that, he did sort of provoke John in the Rolling Stone interview by asking him whether this picture of Paul with the baby was a dig at John and Yoko because of their miscarriage. Which is quite, if John had leapt on that, God knows what would have happened. But John said, no, I don't think it was that. I just think Paul was trying to copy John and Yoko doing a family album because they'd done the wedding album. But anyway, so that's Jan Wenner. But it's an interesting period because Paul was, on the one hand, just married to Linda, not many months married to Linda. And he had a baby daughter, Mary, and he had Heather, who from Linda's previous marriage. So in one sense, it was all sort of lovey-dovey, sort of first throes of marriage and being in love and all that. But at the same time, the Beatles were splitting up, and it was a traumatic experience for him, and he was drinking too much, and he wasn't getting out of bed in the morning, as he says in the song, every night. So he felt useless, because he didn't have a job. The Beatles had been his job, and he didn't have a job anymore. So Linda said she had a hard time because she had a baby to feed, and her husband was in bed or drunk most of the time during that period. But she pulled him out of it and said, look, you've either got to sort of give up or make a comeback. And so she gradually pulled him out of the hole. And as we know, he made a tremendous recovery and had a tremendous solo career. One annoying comment, which I think Stephen Thomas Erlewine said, is that you can tell from this album, this is the front cover by the way, the bowl of cherries, you can tell from this album the nagging lack of consistency or mediocrity of Paul McCartney's solo career. Well, screw him, sorry, I don't agree. I think this as Carr and Tyler said, Hindsight displays its charms, this album, and it's got a lot more to it than people gave it credit for at the time. Even though it is light and loose and underproduced or unfinished in many cases. Anyway, there was a huge conflict over the release date because McCartney wanted to release it in April. The Let It Be album was due out around the same time, and so was Ringo's album, so there was a big conflict over that. John and George wrote a letter to Paul saying your album should be delayed. Ringo took it round to Paul's house, got sort of swiftly thrown out of the house with McCartney shouting, and there's some interesting quotes from John. Where is it? Yeah, so basically John is recounting that Ringo had to go around to his house. We weren't against him putting out an album. I mean, he'd done it. We didn't want to put out Let It Be and Paul's at the same time. It would have killed the sales. There has to be timing. Paul's was just an ego game. It would have killed Let It Be. We asked Ringo to go and talk to him because Ringo had not taken sides or anything like that. And he had been straight about it. And we thought that Ringo would be able to talk fairly to Paul. I mean, if Ringo agreed that it was unfair, then it was unfair. Ringo went and asked him, and he attacked Ringo and he started threatening him and everything, and that was the kibosh for Ringo. And then Ringo, from his point of view, says, they didn't send me round. They, as directors of the company, wrote a letter to him, and I didn't think it was fair for some office lad should take something like that round. So I was talking to the office and they were telling me what was going on. I said, send it up, I'll take it round. I couldn't fear him then, but he got angry, and because we were asking him to hold his album back, and the album was very important to him. He shouted and pointed at me. He told me to get out of his house. He was crazy. He went crazy. He was out of control, prodding his finger towards my face. He told me to put my coat on and get out. Couldn't believe what was happening. I just brought the letter. I said, I agree with everything that's in the letter, because we tried to work it like a company, not as individuals. So poor old Ringo got the short straw and had to sort of face Paul's anger. But Paul, as Ringo said, it was an emotional moment, hit his first solo album, so he didn't take kindly to being told what to do. But I think this whole sort of problem was due to a lack of communication at the time, because Paul spent most of his time in Scotland or hidden away in the studio in secret recording his album, and he wasn't coming into the office. So miscommunications and lack of misunderstandings could easily happen, and this is one of them. Anyway, I've talked a lot about the background. Let's talk about the music, and let's also show you my copies. This is my original UK copy, which I picked up in the late 70s. It's not the first press, I don't think. This is my rather in not very good condition US copy, well worn, which I picked up at a record fair. This is my son's Japanese copy with the nice obby strip. And as with all Japanese albums, it comes with the lyrics, which is nice. This is a German pressing. And of course, with the German Gemma label, you get a slightly different apple, as I've shown you, with different German pressings. Very nice. And then we've got the archive edition, which came out a few years ago. And this has additional material like live versions of Every Night, Maybe I'm Amazed, and Hot as Sun from '79 from Wings, which is nice to hear. So that's my copies of McCartney, and then come to that in a minute. So the music, well, I think most of it is outstanding. I think The Lovely Linda is a charming little intro to the album with very nice chord changes. Could have made it into a proper song, but it's lovely as it is. And that would be something I agree with George Harrison, it is a highlight for me of the whole album, and I think it's superbly played with Paul prominent on the bass. And he did a version on Unplugged, which wasn't even on the same level, because he wasn't trying to play the bass on that version for some inexplicable reason. We have a sort of instrumental Valentine Day, which is okay, and then we move into Every Night, which is one of Paul's best songs ever, period, in my opinion. Lovely melody, lovely sentiment. Hot as Sun, instrumental. Glasses, instrumental, okay, both of those. Junk, another sublime melody from Paul, which dates back to the Beatles days. He demoed the song during the Isha sessions for the White Album, but it didn't make the cut. But I love the melody, I love the words. Man, We Was Lonely. I love it, but not everyone does. Richard Williams, in the Melody Maker, who wrote this article about the state of the Beatles' affairs at the time, and then said, yeah, he praised Maybe I'm Amazed, but then he said, but then there's Man, We Was Lonely, which is sheer banality. If it had been sung by Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, Mick and Titch, I and you would have sneered and turned it off. It's the worst example of his music hall side. Well, I don't agree. I think it's lovely. And Paul obviously didn't agree because he included it on his Wingspan compilation years later. It's just an effortless melody, and he wrote it on the spot, apparently, on the day he recorded it. Turn over to side 2, and we've got Ooh You, which started off as an instrumental. It's quite a sort of raucous workout, and Paul added words. Pretty decent. Mama Miss America, 2 instrumentals joined together with Paul prominent on the bass, very enjoyable. Teddy Boy, as we know, had been rehearsed in Let It Be, but the other Beatles hadn't really taken it seriously, but it's a lovely melody. Linda's singing nice harmony here. Instrumental Junk, a little bit redundant. Maybe I'm Amazed, tour de force song, tour de force performance, although I slightly prefer Wings' live version. I know a lot of you don't agree with that, but anyway, it is well played by McCartney, but I just can't help I can't help contemplating what it would have been like had it been recorded for Abbey Road, with George Harrison playing the lead and the others doing the harmonies. But anyway, it turned out as fine as a solo song. Creena Craw is a sort of instrumental thing at the end about sort of a Red Indian tribe after Paul had seen the documentary on TV, and it's quite nice. So yeah, I mean, I think this is 75% brilliant, this album, and the rest of it is inoffensive. What else can we say? Yeah, I've got a couple of cuttings here. Paul actually wrote to the Melody Maker himself in 1970, in May. Who does McCartney think he is? Who does McCartney think he is? We don't see anything of him for a year, and then out he pops with his mysterious hermit-like existence, advertising his new record in a publicity-crazed manner. Does he really think we'll believe that he played all the instruments? Let's face it, Mailbag, we're not suckers. It's obvious George Martin had a lot to do with it. In fact, if you listen carefully to the end of the 3rd track, played backwards, you can almost hear him whistling. Signed, Paul McCartney. I photocopied the offices of the Melody Maker. I went there in the 90s and spent half a day there just photocopying articles like that from their archives, because I said I was writing a book on the 70s, and so they allowed me sort of access to all of the back issues. And then this article by Richard Williams is very interesting because he's just contemplating the state of the Beatles, which are on the verge of splitting up. This was written right about the time when Paul did his press release, and he's saying it's only natural for John not to like some of Paul's songs. Maxwell's Silver Hammer, for instance. He can still dig others, brackets like Let It Be. It would be hard to imagine 2 more diametrically opposed characters, and Paul gives the lie to their supposed mutual hatred when in the interview he says, I love John and respect what he does. How could it be any other way? The members of the family may have their squabbles, but they've been through too much together for them ever to make a complete split. Their little habit of sending each other postcards for no other reason than to keep in touch is an example of this kind of brotherhood. They may not agree with one another about very many things, but the feeling is still there and it may again bear fruit. And if it doesn't, why should we complain? It isn't going to stop them making music. I think that's pretty nicely said. And George at the time was saying similar things about, you can't split because if you're listening, I'm the walrus too. So at the time, I think that it was an unknown situation and they didn't know themselves that they were splitting up, but they were. And with hindsight, of course, they say we knew, but I don't think at the time they did. Anyway, Richard Williams then reviews the album and he's quite dismissive. He said his first solo album is not, with one or two exceptions, the carefully crafted and smoothly produced statement one might have expected. For most of the trip, it's just a man alone in a small recording studio, fiddling around with a few half-written songs and a load of instruments. It's good to know that he's human. With this record, his debt to George Martin becomes increasingly clear. No one was there, no one who wasn't there will ever know, but Martin's orchestral cushionings must have been vital to the success of many of the Beatles songs, and Paul's compositions are the ones which have always seemed to require the greatest amount of adornment. I don't think Paul would have been very happy to read that. By the way, this book I was showing you earlier, and I want to read a quote from George. This is Keith Badman, another masterpiece from Keith. This book, Off the Record, with a foreword from Hunter Davis, no less. And George, at the time, is quoted 7th of March. He was asked about the Beatles. Are they splitting up? Everyone keeps asking the same question. There are some people around who can't imagine the world without the Beatles. That's what it must be. But this had to happen. We had to find ourselves individually one day. It was the natural course of events. The thing is that people think we know all the answers about the Beatles, and we don't. Who are we? We can't give the answer, and I, for one, can't define that special something else that made us what we are, made us as we are. It wasn't just the records or our concerts. You tell me. We've all left the Beatles one by one. I left because of a musical policy dispute with Paul. Ringo went into films, and John went into the bed-in bit with Yoko, and now Paul's making his own album. It's true we don't see much of Paul. He's gone off the coming into the office scene. He wants to be quiet and left alone, and he doesn't want to create any ripples, and after 10 years he deserves to be quiet. I'm going to disappear soon myself for a rest. I'll probably go back to India for a while. And maybe when this year's over and we've got out of all of the things we're into, we will get back. We just can't stop being Beatles whatever we do. Besides, we're contracted to each other until 77. Funny, I didn't discover that till the other day. I don't think the others even know that yet. But it's all unity through diversity, Don. That's why I dig the title Let It Be just now, because it fits the picture. Why try and fight the natural turn of events? I think it's a very enlightening and mature comment from George on the state of the Beatles at the time when they were splitting up, no less. So thank you for watching. This was the McCartney album. I'll just quickly show you the gatefold with all the family pictures. A lot of people objected to, like, Paul trying to be all cozy domesticity, but at the same time, as they saw it, sticking the knife in and splitting the Beatles, and so he was the villain of the piece for a good few years after this. But anyway, so that was the McCartney album. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'm going to leave the link to the Wombles video if you want to get a bit of Christmas cheer early. Do that. And happy Christmas to everyone, and I'll see you when I get back from England.